Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to set a slightly different tone today, a bit more grounded, a bit more real. Because today we're unpacking a pretty unsettling truth behind something we constantly praise in our society. We look at people who remain perfectly calm while everyone else is absolutely panicking, the ones who seem to have it all figured out, and we call it confidence, we call it leadership. But when we actually look at the psychology behind it, we often find a very old, very tired survival mechanism.
It's a heavy question to kick things off with, isn't it? Are you actually confident, or are you just surviving? Because behind those steady hands and that "I've got this" attitude you show the world, there isn't always a deep sense of self-assurance. Often, there's just a person who learned a really long time ago that they were literally the only one they could ever truly rely on. This is about performing competence, simply because you feel like you have absolutely no other choice.
Okay, let's dive into this. The psychological issue we're looking at today is not arrogance. It's what we call performing competence. True confidence operates from a baseline of safety, right? It says, I know I'll succeed, and if I don't, hey, I'll be okay. But performing competence says, I know I am not allowed to fail. To the outside world, you look like this unbreakable pillar of strength, but internally, you might feel entirely different. You feel like you're wearing a mask of fake confidence, maybe just because you've completely forgotten how to be anything else. The really profound problem with this adaptation is that the mask is incredibly heavy. When you wear it all the time, you find it literally impossible to ask for help, even when you are completely drowning. It creates this strange, lingering guilt whenever you aren't being actively useful or hyperproductive. It prevents the people around you from seeing your genuine needs, and over time, the real tragedy is that it prevents you from even feeling your own needs. You aren't being confident because you want to be, you're being confident because you're terrified of what happens if you stop.
Section 1. The root of the mask.
We really need to go below the surface here because psychology tells us this type of relentless self-reliance almost never starts in adulthood. It starts with what developmental psychologists call parentification or survival independence. This happens when a child grows up in an environment where emotional support is inconsistent or they're forced to manage adult responsibilities way before they're ready. The brain has to adapt to survive. And how does it do that? By learning that its own feelings must come last. The child learns that if a problem is going to be solved, well, they have to be the one to do it. They don't learn to rely, they learn to resolve.
And this brilliantly illustrates how early environments map directly onto adult behavior. If your emotions were regularly overlooked, you don't just become independent, you develop extreme isolating self-sufficiency. If affection was unstable, your adult brain prioritizes absolute loyalty over intense fleeting affection. You chase safety, not excitement. And if you were never the first choice as a kid, you develop a hyper-awareness of social signals. You become an absolute expert at reading tone, pauses, and shifts in behavior, sensing distance long before anyone else admits it. Your brain learned that rejection comes quietly, so you're constantly scanning for it.
I want to pause here for a second so we can really let this sink in. You didn't build this strength for success. You built it for survival. You appear self-reliant and calm during a crisis, not because you are inherently fearless, but because your nervous system was wired by early stress to handle the absolute worst-case scenario. It's an incredibly impressive adaptation for sure, but man, it is an exhausting one. Which brings us to Section 2, the architecture of survival.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because I love looking at this through the metaphor of how we construct our internal world based on what we had to work with as kids. Think of your psychology like a house. Most people build their confidence on a foundation of safety. They know that if the roof leaks, someone will be there to help them fix it. But for those who grew up way too fast, that foundation was never safety. It was responsibility. You learned to hold the roof up yourself because experience taught you that no one else was coming to do it for you.
And this creates a really isolating experience in adulthood. When people look at you and say, wow, you're so strong, or you're so confident, it can actually feel like a massive burden. It feels like they're complimenting the incredible way you're holding up the entire house, totally blind to the fact that your arms are violently shaking under the weight. You look unshakable, but internally, you're struggling to trust any support because past experience tells you it's only going to be temporary.
Let's look at Section 3. The weight of independence.
So what does it actually cost to live like this?
carrying the survival mechanism into high-achieving adulthood takes a massive psychological toll. Let's rapidly fire through some of the core symptoms here. You stay mentally alert even when everything is completely peaceful. You constantly overgive in relationships just to make yourself irreplaceable. You might experience what looks like laziness, but psychology actually calls it selective discipline, where your mind works so hard imagining, planning, and anticipating worst-case scenarios that your cognitive energy is totally drained before you even take a single action. You have uneasy rest, and you have guarded empathy, meaning you read people perfectly, but you are fiercely cautious with your trust.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it reframes our entire understanding of rest. For most people, calm is peace, but for the hyper-independent brain, calm is just the silence before a storm. This is exactly why rest actually feels like danger to you. When things are quiet, your nervous system doesn't shut down, it ramps up. It stays on high alert, scanning the horizon, just waiting for that inevitable moment when something goes wrong.
And this all feeds into a really deep fear of being temporary. You overgive, and you step up to solve everyone's problems, not because you have endless energy, but because you learn that love feels conditional. You feel useful only when you are needed. It's this unconscious strategy to avoid being quietly swapped out or abandoned. Because the truth is, you don't fear loneliness nearly as much as you fear being replaceable. Moving into Section 4, Putting Down the Mask.
So, how do we begin the journey back to the surface? Understanding this pattern isn't about diagnosing a flaw. It's about gaining a quiet, empowering clarity. If you've spent your entire life being the strong one, you really need to internalize this profound truth. Your fake confidence isn't a lie. It's an adaptation. You are not a fraud for feeling completely overwhelmed behind your capable exterior. You're simply a person whose nervous system learned early on to prioritize survival over softness. It kept you safe. It got you here.
So the crucial point is that healing doesn't mean you have to become weak. It means learning that you are finally allowed to rest. Asking for help isn't a sign that your hard-earned confidence is failing. It's actually the ultimate sign that you finally feel safe enough in your environment and in yourself to put that incredibly heavy mask down. You have full permission to shift your identity. You can absolutely stop being the person who has all the answers, and you can start being a person who has needs. You don't have to be the choice for everyone else before you are the choice for yourself. It is okay to let go of the guilt associated with receiving care. You don't have to constantly earn your right to be supported. I want you to look really closely at the parts of yourself you've always proudly called your strengths. Your fierce independence, your unflappable calm, your tireless productivity. And I want you to ask yourself, honestly, were these built out of a joyful desire to grow or a desperate need to survive? The goal of life isn't to be the most unbothered, confident person in the room. The goal is to be the most honest one, starting with yourself.
You were a child who had to be an adult. Now you are an adult who is finally allowed to be human. Take a breath and put the weight down. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Ask yourself, what is one piece of that heavy mask you are finally ready to take off?